yes, just with mutation, you can dial back the clocks of mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome. But when you say, okay, it's mutation and God creates Adam and Eve with differences, that fits the data quite well.
Yeah.
And better than evolution does.
Welcome, everybody, to the Engaged Truth Show. I'm Caleb Harrelson, your host, and I have with me Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson joining us today. I'm here at the Creation Museum here in Kentucky. So super excited to have you joining me on the show. Dr. Jeanson, how are you doing?
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, sir. It's such a joy and an honor. And if anyone hasn't heard, they need to know about his new book, Traced. And it's just excellent research going on. And I'm so excited. I think we were just talking that there's just such a high demand. They're having to print more. Is that correct?
We ran out of the first printing, and because of COVID-related delays, paper shortages and such, the second printing should be in probably the third week of June, and then the third printing in August. So, and I apologize, I'm all nasally because of sinus infection-related issues. So, it sounds weird. It's because it is weird.
Well, we're grateful to have you here with us today on the show. And if anyone's been following AIG the past couple of months, really past couple of years, you kind of what's come up with Traced is the culmination of lots of research, and you had replacing Darwin as well. And then so it's real exciting because I think you're having some confirmation of some models. Is that right?
Yeah, Traced really represents the fulfillment of predictions in replacing Darwin, which is also then 5 years of research post replacing Darwin.
Yeah.
And especially a lot of research in the last 2 or 3 years. And it focuses as its primary tool. So the primary focus of the book is human history and the genetics of human history, and the specific question of the story of the peoples of human history that I never learned in school.
Yeah.
Which none of us could unless we had, well, either we could have if we had historical records that for every common person on the street that could trace their ancestry back, which we don't, or you have DNA. And that field of science, of course, is recent, and the specific tool that I'm using, the male inherited DNA, the Y chromosome from fathers to sons, is all within the last 5 to 10 years, which is another reason I never learned it in school, because this is this type of data was not available back then. And even if it was, I think there would still be a lot of confusion, because the vast majority of science and historical research is within the mainstream framework, which is not going to get you the right answer, because in the apologetic point of the book, it's not primarily an apologetic book, but it has massive apologetic ramifications. The primary apologetic application, I guess, would be that this is all done with a 4,500-year time scale, and you can see real history pop out of the DNA-based family tree, which you're not going to see that sort of thing in the mainstream time scale. And so creation science is uniquely positioned to answer questions, and is answering questions that the mainstream community cannot and will not be able to do. And creation scientists are now taking the lead, making sense of the world that we see, testing it against the history that we do know, exploring history that we don't, sections that are called prehistory, for example, pre-Columbian Americas, pre-written records, basically, because either the records were there and lost, or never written down, or destroyed. So many conquering empires do that. So there's just a ton that comes out of that. Yeah,
it's exciting. And so you mentioned how the biblical timeline fits so well. You're saying like 4,500 years, that Babel on, or is that flood on, or?
I mentioned 4,500 years thinking about Babel because the tool we're using is again the father to son type of DNA. And if you think back to creation, there's the Y chromosome would be a single copy of the Y chromosome. Adam's Y chromosome. Eve is XX. Females are XX. Males are XY. Basic biology. That somehow is now politically incorrect. And the only way you get differences then is by copying errors post-fall, where Adam and Eve are reproducing, and Adam's sperm cells are copying the Y chromosome, but doing so imperfectly, and we have a measurement of the rate today. And these differences rise over time. Now, there's nothing special about the Y chromosome where you can say, that spot right there is a mutation. It's all comparative. I get your Y chromosome, I get my Y chromosome. We line them up, 99% of it is identical. And there's just a few spots, mismatch, and that's what you call a mutation. And to go pre-flood, pre-Noah's Y chromosome sequence, you would need something to compare to in the pre-flood world, which we don't. They'll die.
Yeah, that'd
So
be hard.
we can compare the 3 boys to one another because they're going to have mutations that are different from Noah, but then you stop. So I'm taking as the beginning point for that Y chromosome tree is 4,500. I mean, okay, you could say Noah's birth is pre-flood.
Okay,
he's 500
sure.
years old, 600 years old.
Yeah.
But in terms of the events that we can see, the first event then is the birth of the kids, which is technically pre-flood as well.
Mm-hmm.
But and the book itself goes through a range of dates, but it's roughly 4,500 years ago. Instead of creation itself, that's the big difference because we don't have these pre-flood sequences of the people who died to compare them to.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And so I've heard you explain a lot recently that in this model, is in essence, if we get more data, would we be able to trace people back to one of Noah's sons? Is that right? Am I understanding that correctly?
The data that we have currently is sufficient, I would say, to go back to 3 sons of Noah. So any person who takes a Y chromosome test, or any male who takes a Y chromosome test, which, by the way, the genetic testing companies still cannot go woke in that sense.
Yeah, they still have to do science.
Right, they still have to ask you when you're buying a Y chromosome test, do you have a Y chromosome? Doesn't matter what you think you are. We can't test you. You won't like the result if you don't have one.
Yeah.
So anyone who takes a Y chromosome test and they get the result in theory now, and that's part of what's in this book, the last table in it, there's 235 color plates, so tons of illustrations to try to make it easier to follow. In the last table that covers 4 pages, it's quite visible in the camera, but it says, if this is your Y chromosome haplogroup, which is the technical term for your branch, here's the son you come from, the biblical lineage, where's your early location, with some of the other history, because everyone's history is messy.
Yeah.
Every people group's history is messy, it seems. And then which chapter to look at to read more about that specific history. Or we have a web portal that about 400 people have written into.
Really?
And it's you go to our homepage, ancestryingenesis.org, or you can type it in. So ancestryingenesis.org/go/traced, which is the title of the book.
Yeah.
And it's also in this book. It's an appendix A. The primary purpose of that webpage was to give some of the technical details. I tried to make this book as accessible for the average person. But if there are nerds, how'd you get that? You can go to that website and find that supplemental. But also then, for people who've taken a test or they want to get some help with it, and probably half the people who've written in roughly have been, I took a Y chromosome test, the result is this, it doesn't seem to match up with your book. And that's going to happen a lot just because the companies use different notations for how they report results, and it takes me 10 seconds to convert it. So it's really easy. And I like doing it, but you can find out exactly which son of Noah you come from. And really, what would be probably more accurate is every person probably comes from several sons, couple of sons or 3 sons of Noah.
Yeah.
Simply because there's so much mixing in human history. That's part of the point of the book. And the way you find this out is you get more male relatives. So I've done my Y chromosome. We've had my mother's brother do his Y chromosome. We're hoping to get my dad's mother's brother or some of that side.
And it's one of the standard genetic tests. Is there a certain one people need to do? Or
the major genetic testing companies, many of them will do it. Ancestry.com is probably one of the exceptions, just because they're, for whatever reason, they've chosen to only look at the DNA you get from a single parent. They're looking only at the DNA you get from both parents. 99% of your DNA is from both parents, so fine, you start there.
Yeah.
But this needs to be, for technical reasons, the male inherited Y chromosome, and so 23andMe does this. Last I checked, family tree DNA, CRI genetics, I think. So there's multiple options right now, because again, offers change, technical details change. So I always say you got to check with customer service just to confirm.
Yeah, for sure.
But 23andMe seems to get a pretty good detail on the Y chromosome for the price that they offer, where you can take those results and for some of the major Western European branches, let's say, where we've got significant amount of detail and historical events associated with them, they'll give you all that. Whereas some of the cheap tests from the other places, or the most basic, the cheapest test, the basic test, they say, oh, this is just the major section or branch. Well,
sure,
nice to know, but not that helpful. Still can go back to a certain son of Noah, but I want to know more detail if I can.
Yeah, the more info, the better. So people can basically help you with your research by giving you their testing info?
Yes. And so
that's awesome.
There's actually, I should say, a couple different categories, a couple different purposes of that portal. and categories of volunteers that would be most useful for future research. First of all, whatever category you find yourself in, write in. I'm happy to get all these. And there's often surprises. People will write in saying, "Hey, I got this result," and those are the most fun, and oftentimes can't contain the most important historical information for those questions we've yet to answer. But if you're part of let's say you get a result and it's rare, usually this is a good sign this is going to be relevant historically. If you belong to a minority group, if you're part of a people group that's a minority group, that's going to be likely. That's oftentimes where some of the key historical events to be uncovered still lie.
Yeah.
What we have now, of course, is dominated by the winners of history, and plenty of those people have written in. I mean, I belong to a lineage in Western Europe that is 50-75% of them. And many people also belong to the same branch and have written in, I should say winners. It's the winners in terms of who's had the most sons.
Yeah.
What I say in the book for this
numerically, right?
Yeah. R1b is it looks like it came to Western Europe in the Middle Ages, or into Europe in the Middle Ages, and probably was done on the Balkans until the Ottomans made their last push into Hungary, and then they fled and had more kids.
Yep.
And similar to what's going on right now in Europe with the Middle Eastern refugees, where there's no political takeover. It's not like Syrians are now running for election as the president of France and Germany. They are coming as Muslims, and their religious practices are simply such they have big families.
Yeah.
And even secular demographers are saying, given the low rates at which secular Europe, Caucasian Europe tends to reproduce, which is almost below replacement levels.
Yeah.
You have that continue for a few generations. You have these Muslims come in and they reproduce and have lots of families. You can have a dramatic demographic switch in Europe without any political events. It's simply these differential rates of reproduction. That seems to be what's going on, has been going on historically in Europe as well. But it's those groups. It's missionaries. Let's say you're working with an unreached group, and I've had a couple write in. One from New Guinea. If you're Native American, we've had a number of Native Americans write in because there's some pretty big changes to how we understand pre-Columbian history that we already know, and there's big questions left to solve.
Wow.
We've got a video on that if you just want to see the summary for free at our YouTube channel.
Yeah, it's
exciting. A whole traced playlist, about 6 videos or so, that'll give some previews and sneak previews of what's in the book. And so I've had a number of Native Americans, different Native American tribes, nations write in saying, I'm interested in this. We don't have any context for this. I'm a Christian. I'm a creationist. How can I participate? So it's really open-ended at this point.
Yeah.
Because we're just at the early stages, and I anticipate this will take me the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So, and we still won't answer all the questions. So anytime you run across this video or you take a test or you want to participate, answersingenesis.org/go/traced.
Yeah.
And you can enter name, email. It goes directly to my inbox, and I respond to all these.
That's so exciting. And well, you're saying how massive this research is going to be. It's going to serve so many people. It's exciting. And I've heard you say that you found the Rosetta Stone of human DNA. Is that right? Is that how you're coining the concept, right?
Yeah, we're marketing it as something really big.
Yeah.
And that can sound like an overstatement to say we found the Rosetta Stone of human history. I'd like to say, and not because it's my research, but I think if you consider the implications, that description I think is appropriate. And just to put it in context, what's the original Rosetta Stone? The literal stone that was found, I think 35 miles from Alexandria, 1799, I think was the year. So at that time, no one can read hieroglyphics. They know that pyramids exist. You've got these massive ruins. You've got this magnificent civilization that people knew existed, but you're missing this key window into the past, what the Egyptians themselves said about their history. And so what was a big breakthrough, played a big role in this breakthrough, was this stone that had hieroglyphics. It had Demotic, Egyptian cursive, not demonic, but Demotic.
Yeah.
And then Greek, so that people could read Greek at that time. And that was part of the finding that correlations between the two that cracked the code. And then now we can find out what they said about their history and the pharaohs. And so, well, this now is saying we've got a great new tool. It's not linguistic, it's not a literal stone, but it's this family tree for all of humanity. It's generation by generation. You can literally read them off. Shen, his son Arphaxad, all the way down to Genesis 10. Excuse me, down to the tips of the tree. I mean, I've worked with Arabs now who've entered their data, and anyway, you can see some of these family relationships that don't fit the mainstream time scale, but do fit the young Earth time scale. And this is not just a new window into Egypt's past. They're question of Egypt is 2 chapters in this book. Ancient Egypt, can we find their descendants? But it's the whole globe. So here's a tool to answer a question of peoples that, again, I personally didn't have an answer to for many years. In history class, we learned political and cultural and religious history.
Yeah.
And it's not just Egypt, but it's the whole globe. So this, to me, is a really big, monumental finding, and it's the creationists who are taking the lead on this.
Yeah, praise God for that. That's awesome. All right, and you mentioned there's some different anomalies. Like, I think that the typical narrative is on the migration to North America. Are you finding anything different with that, or how is that unfolding?
Yes, one of the biggest findings I think that comes out of this research relates to the pre-Columbian Americas, and the mainstream narrative is some band of Central Asians goes across the Bering Strait by Alaska. 15,000 years ago, they rapidly spread throughout the Americas, North and Central and South America, and then sit there for 14,500 years until Europeans arrived with Columbus, or Leif Erikson, if you want to go back a few centuries.
Yeah.
And even in mainstream science, some of that stereotypical narrative is being overturned, where instead of, these were tree-hugging, primitive natives in harmony with nature, and these big bad Europeans came in and disrupted. No, they were transforming their environment. I mean, there's archaeological research saying 10% or more of the Amazon might be cultivated forest. And this is not creationist saying, this is mainstream. In the ancient literature, they're saying there were massive numbers of people here. So just for comparison's sake, in Europe, 1400, post-Black Death, estimated 60 million people. And that's around a ballpark. I mean, there's big debate still, but ballpark, sort of middle of the road estimate for the Americas in 1491. So there's lots of people. They're transforming their environment. But what they haven't gone yet is that there have been multiple settlings. And what this also doesn't have as part of it, and what the mainstream narrative still communicates, is a major disconnect with the history learned in school. What this research shows is there's been multiple settlings in the Americas before Columbus. So one of the most recent was a group of Central Asians, Mongolians, Siberians who came over probably about 1000 AD. This happens to be at the same time another group of Central Asians comes into Europe and gives rise to lineages like mine and Western Europeans. So there's an event that's anchored now in old world history. The most dominant lineage in the Americas today came across about the 300s, 600s AD, which is one of the most exciting ones to me, because that era, as it relates to Central Asia, is hugely significant in accepted history. That's the Huns coming into Europe and overthrowing the Roman Empire. The 200s or so is another Central Asian group, lesser known. The Shanbai coming and overthrowing playing a role, I think, in the downfall of the Han Dynasty. So sort of the Roman era equivalent in Eastern Asia. So, and I should say here as well, mainstream history talks about this as the great wandering of peoples, or the German word, I think, the Volkswanderung. So they're saying something stirring in Asia. All these Central Asian peoples are on the move and on the march, and leading to the downfall of these classic era civilizations. Is it any surprise then genetically we see another group coming across perhaps the Bering Strait into the Americas and dispersing right around the time, the 600s AD in the Americas, when one of the great cities of that day, Teotihuacan in Mexico, was violently overthrown. So there could be a cause-effect relationship there. And of course, a couple centuries later is the downfall of the Roman equivalent of the Americas, the Mayans. Their civilization collapses. And before that, before the 300s, of course, the Mayans had existed, the Olmecs had existed archaeologically. We don't have their lineages yet. So that's part of the mystery still to be solved. And I should add here as well, what's perhaps one of the most exciting aspects of this project is we can see Indigenous accounts matching up almost point per point. In this White Crumbs tree, the Delaware Indians, that Lenni Lenape supposedly have a written record, and I say supposedly, I'll explain in a minute, called the Wallam Olam. Well, some guy in 1995, I think, wrote his PhD thesis at Rutgers anthropology, saying it was a forgery, and got the Delaware Nation to disown it and claim it was not authentic. This was there's questions I still don't have answers to, and the provenance and all that sort of thing, but it at least goes back to the 1800s, early 1800s. If you take what's been published of that Delaware narrative, origins and migration narrative, again, there's a very strong echo point for point in terms of sequence of events and timing, all these sorts of things. in the Y chromosome tree. And so then you have to ask the question, well, what's the chance that some dude in the early 1800s is going to predict genetic discoveries 100, 200 years later?
Yeah.
Fat chance, I think. So there's a way this research returns to indigenous peoples, the histories that they have. The Choctaw and Chickasaw have an origins narrative that finds a pretty close echo in the tree. Wow. And there's more from Africa, from Asia. People say this is who we came from, and you find it in the Y chromosome tree if you have the unearthed time scale. So part of what's already gotten going, because again, I've said there's some Native Americans who've written in, First Nations people who've written in. We want to discover this further. One of the first steps is what other origins narratives are out there that the mainstream community has neglected. And already I think we're beginning to see some of these connections among these Native stories, which, and I'm excited because here's the history I never learned in school. I learned practically next to nothing about Native American history. Mm-hmm. Yes, who the Europeans encountered, the practices and cultures that these people had, but what they were doing and who they came from, unaddressed, never learned. Big black box for me. So to finally begin to find out these answers and to say, okay, it's among these Native communities themselves, but no one's written this down, or no one's bothered to collect all this. That's one of the biggest research tasks, I think, going forward that I'm very excited about. In fact, it may not be me. It may just be, hey, we get a bunch of, maybe it's a number of Christian creationist Native Americans who say we want to participate, and they get together and compare their narratives and they discover what's going on. That is ultimately the biggest goal. I think that's the biggest pipe dream thing. All this is because this is a global history. To see people groups around the world say, I see where this can go. They take ownership of it and run with it. That to me is probably the most ideal outcome in all this. Is not. Yeah,
absolutely. And as I'm thinking about it, I just thank you again for coming on, because I know you're a busy man. You have a lot of interviews you're doing, and as I'm thinking, like, any way we can get this out there, we'll get more exposure to this excellent research and more people to jump on, Lord willing, and helping out with the data gathering and so forth. And I think, isn't there's kind of this this concept of maybe there's some, like, I think you've mentioned some of like this lost people group that maybe we'll be able to uncover, like, where are they at now when you do some more research. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess that speaks to a broader principle. Yeah, where you have some unique circumstances in the Americas, because the 60 million or so who were here, 90% of them died in the 3 centuries following the arrival of Europeans. Tragic element to all this, and some of these questions may not be answerable because the lineages of those who were here before are gone. I don't know, but there's one way to find out. The bigger principle, though, is because we've gone from globally 350 million people, roughly, in 1400 AD, to now close to 8 billion. That's a 20-fold increase, massive increase. Yeah. Or if you look backwards in time, today's population compared to 600 years ago is 95% smaller. Or to summarize, maybe a technical point, simple but technical point, in the sense that once you grasp it, it's simple, but it's not well known. The branches on our family tree, global family tree, reflect population size. So you've got nearly 8 billion branches on the tree today. You have to reduce it to 350 million, and you do that by connecting them. So 95% of today's branches connect to 600 years ago. Oh, wow. What that means is most of the branches today reflect recent history. Oh, okay. And so if you want to find out the ancient history, you've got to go looking for the rare lineages and such. And so that's why people have a rare result or something unusual, maybe one of the key clues to uncovering, well, what about this ancient people that we have yet to find their signature? Yeah. So the ancient Assyrians, the ancient Sumerians, like I said, the Mayans, the Olmecs, there's all sorts of ancient peoples you might read about in a book, in a textbook, for which we don't yet have their Y chromosome branch. Now, yet, because 99% of the men alive today have yet to get have yet to have a published Y chromosome sequence. So I think it's out there. People watching may have it. I don't know if you've done a Y chromosome test, but you may have the answer. I will after this interview. You may have the answer within you as to some of these ancient peoples. But that's in the background. And to give a caution, this whole math of 95% collapse or 95% reduction in branch numbers You and I have a 95% chance of having the same common ancestor.
Yeah.
600 years ago. That's another ramification of this. My wife and I have this 95% chance.
Yeah.
And me and any person watching, everything else being equal, 95% chance, same common ancestor. So all this is in the background. It has obviously massive ramifications for how we understand race and ethnicity.
Sure.
When this sort of common ancestry shows up so quickly in the family tree.
Wow, yeah.
But that's also, again, since we're discussing the research side of things,
sure,
that's one of the biggest factors to consider, and why I say there's still so much left to be uncovered.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And a lot of people like to say, oh, the timeline and population growth as far as from flood to today, or even Adam and Eve with the mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam. I guess the short answer to that, like, does the data show that could fit within a biblical creation timeline, and how?
Yeah, so I'd say there's three major genetic compartments, if you think about humans, that are relevant to that question. You've got 99% of the DNA that you get from both parents.
Sure.
You've got the Y chromosome from dad, and you've got mitochondrial DNA from mom. Men and women have mitochondrial DNA, but only mom passes it on, so far, as we know. But only males have this Y chromosome. The mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome, both of those are, because they're inherited through one parent, pretty much all the differences are, from a creationist perspective, we're in a sense forced to explain all these differences by mutation.
Sure, right.
And from what we've measured, how many mitochondrial differences between a mother and a daughter, Y chromosome between a father and a son. Those measurements represent, you could say, the measurement of the ticks of the clock. The mitochondrial DNA clock, Y chromosome clock, how fast or slow does this change over time? And if you know that, and you also know how many Y chromosome differences exist in the world, how many mitochondrial DNA differences exist in the world, you can then say, how long does it take to dial that clock back to zero?
Sure.
And those data indicate Eve, 6,000 years ago, Noah, 4,500 years ago. What about the rest of the DNA?
Sure.
Well, this is inherited from both parents, so I look like a mix of my parents. My DNA will be a 50% on average from dad, 50% from mom. Same for you, same for anyone watching.
Yeah.
And so there's something else to consider here. You have to go back to the beginning and say, okay, Adam is going to have 2 copies of his DNA. I mean, if you don't, you die. It's lethal. 1 chromosome difference out of our 46 is bad. It can have massive health consequences. So that's what I'm saying. Adam would have 46 chromosomes, 2 copies, 23 pairs. What would that DNA have looked like? And I think you can make theological arguments to say God would have created him with DNA differences from the start. If he didn't, so I have 2 different versions of my DNA. It's not like dad codes for the dad's DNA codes for the right arm and mom's for the left. It's in a process we still don't fully understand. That's the 2 sets of information, that their combination that leads to eye color and nose shape and ear shape and everything else. So I look like I'm a mix of 2 people. Would God have created Adam so that he looks like he's the mix of 2 people? Now that would be deceptive, because God tells us exactly that he's created.
Yeah.
What I'm pointing out is, what reproductive potential would Adam have then if he's created with 2 different versions of DNA? If he's created with identical versions, and Eve is made from a side, and she's created with the same versions as he is, so everything's the same, what that means practically then, in technical terms, is that Adam and Eve would have reproduced by cloning.
Oh, yeah, that's an
genetic
excellent point.
cloning, essentially, which is kind of weird to me.
Yeah.
And it makes much more sense to say, I think, Adam gets 2 different versions of his DNA, Eve does as well. And so when they reproduce them, they have the potential to produce every so-called race of people on this planet, to produce diversity immediately in the next generation. And I would also say, I think the genetic evidence that we have fits that. So all 3 compartments, the male only, the female only, and then for both parents, all this fits going back to 2 people just 6,000 years ago, when you consider the biology of it. Yes, just with mutation, you can dial back the clocks of mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome. But when you say, okay, it's mutation and God creates Adam and Eve with differences, that fits the data quite well. And better than evolution does.
Wow, that's incredible. And that seems like it's such a significant point that we should hear about that more. What kind of pushback have you received on that point?
The conclusions with respect, I'd say with respect to, there's been 2 phases to it. The mitochondrial side and the data from DNA from both parents. I hit in replacing Darwin.
Right.
That's the data we had at that point
Mm-hmm.
in time. And the evolutionary community largely ignored it. I did a debate on it. Actually, I did a debate on these types of data, 2 types of debates. One was before that book came out, but I had some papers in print already and had contributed a book chapter to another book called Searching for Adam.
Yeah.
Terry Mortensen was the editor of that, and so I co-authored a chapter with another biologist, new creationist Jeff Tompkins.
Oh, yeah.
From the Institute
Excellent.
for Creation Research. And as a result of that, was invited to a debate with Dennis Venema, who was the biologist at that time or fellow with the Biologos Foundation, or the Biologos group that was founded by Francis Collins, a theistic evolutionary organization.
Mm-hmm.
God used evolution, they'd say. And it was at Southeastern Theological Seminary. And I got to talk for 2 hours, and he got to talk for 2 hours, and there was a Q&A. They didn't call it a debate, really. I think it was a conversation, I guess.
Sure, yeah.
But I'd say Dennis Venema didn't really engage the scientific points, and they tend not to. Their goal is simply to be viewed as acceptable within the Christian community. And they just won't. The things they do say in print are basically creationists or liars when it comes to science.
I read that a lot, yes.
Which is amazing from an organization that prides itself and calls as part of their distinctives humility and gracious dialogue towards those that disagree. That's what they want, and that's the face they want to present when it comes to theological issues.
Sure.
Complete opposite when it comes to scientific ones.
Yeah.
The other debate I did was with a evolutionary biologist from Marshall University, Herman Mays. I don't know that he's got a public religious profession. I think he grew up in a Christian home of some sort, but I don't know that he practices anything these days. And we did it online. Now, what I've put in print for quite some time now, in answer to the question that it's a different question.
Sure.
Why don't more professional scientists agree with this? And my answer is because they aren't even aware of it. They are forbidden to learn about it in school.
Yeah.
And so you've got all these people growing up never hearing about the other side. And is it any surprise they all hold evolution? Well, and you can't make this up. The debate was the book Replacing Darwin.
Yeah.
Basically, please come and peer review it. Here's your chance.
Right.
Blow it up.
Yeah.
Poke all the holes you can. And he basically didn't read it.
Wow.
Which, in retrospect, was very explicable. He had written a blog post several years prior, something like "In Defense of Ridicule." Now, I picked this guy as a debate opponent because I thought he seemed. I think he'd done a debate with Kent Hovind, and he just seemed pretty even keeled.
Okay.
Some evolutionists can get obnoxious, and you say, "What's the whole point of this? No one learns anything watching." And he seemed pretty even keeled, so I thought he'd be a good guy to review this.
Yeah.
And he had written this blog post. I was reminded of or found out after the fact in Defense of Ridicule, where he said, it's long past time to debate creation science. We should just make fun of it. And if you understand that background, it makes sense of what he did in the debate, which was he tried to make the point Jeanson is dumb, doesn't know what he's talking about, but really didn't have any idea what was in the book.
Wow.
Set up straw mans to try to knock them down. And
oh, goodness.
so I feel like the debate was, again, uninformative. So even though he kept his composure, and in that sense would have made a good opponent, he had no interest in engaging any substance of the points, or when he tried to, it was so misguided that you have no idea what you're talking about. And I had this long, probably 12,000 word write-up after the fact to say, okay, look, here's what happened, here's what he said, here's what the book
I think I remember
opposite.
seeing that online. Yeah. So,
and there hasn't been much that's happened since. He has also tried to review this book, so that sparked a fire for him to try to review everything Jeanson says from here on out, perhaps.
Well, getting more exposure, that's one thing. So.
And I will say the response to this book does seem to, we're only a few months out from its release, and there's already been a number of evolutionary responses to it, so I feel like this has garnered more attention from them.
Sure.
Now, here's where it gets really good, and I say this best point for last. The specific responses that have been put in print, and I'll have a video out on this in the future, coming weeks or months, have been a great gift to creation science. So some of the major points they've tried to make are essentially, this book is wrong, the methods are wrong, because the textbook says otherwise.
Oh, wow.
So this is the culmination of 12 years of making predictions, testing it, making predictions, testing it, making predictions, testing it. Anytime something comes up, well, let's do an experiment. The credibility is on the line. You put predictions. I put predictions in this book to do even further research. We're doing further research.
Yeah.
And instead of saying, let's take the book's own way to test itself at face value and do it, they say, this can't be right because the book says otherwise. Well, anyone bother to question whether the book might be wrong, or we could test and evaluate the book's predictions that they're claiming, the evolutionary biology textbook? There's no concept of that.
Yeah.
Or so-and-so said you're wrong. We talked to the authors of a paper and he said you're wrong. I just laugh.
Well, it's just a faulty appeal to authority if that's the basis of your entire argument.
And these are PhDs saying it.
Yeah.
I mean, they should know better that we don't do science because so-and-so said so.
Yeah, exactly.
You go to an experiment. You publish the data. That's science 101.
Absolutely.
And so, I say it's a gift because we've come full circle from 40 years ago, where the creationists are just insisting on their holy book. The Bible says it. We believe it. That settles it. End of discussion. That's anti-science, they'd say.
Yeah.
And it's just your particular interpretation and whatever your high priest of interpretation.
Yeah.
And the evolutionists say, but we're the ones doing science. And so now you've got creationists saying, no, we want to do science. We want to do experiments. Let's test and see if what the book says is true. And really, my response to all this is, if my methods are wrong, or this is wrong, why is it working?
Yeah.
We've got all the scientific success that's happening. It's recapitulating human history, the history of human population growth and fall and so forth. Yeah. And no, but the book says so. So you're the guys with the holy book. You're the guys with the high priest who, if they say so, that settles it. No, none of you want to discuss data.
Yeah.
I could say that evolution's religion and no one would believe me, but y'all are acting like it now by saying there's dogmas that you can't question. When people make pronouncements, you have to accept what they say. No discussion of experiments, or no attempt to take up the claims of the book with experiments. That's what's so, I don't know if it's funny or
very ironic.
It's ironic.
Yeah.
It's a gift in that sense apologetically, because I'm like, okay,
sure.
Well, here's where we're at. I mean, we could be having a scientific discussion. You could try to scientifically refute this.
Yeah.
Instead, you're taking up a hard dogmatic stance, which hopefully clarifies for everyone observing where things are at.
Sure.
I guess it's sad.
Yeah, no, I think it's huge to see the inconsistency of their own presuppositions, and as you pointed out, it's if we're being honest, it's like the high priest of Darwinism say we have a book, and we're saying we have a book, but it's also confirmed in the data too.
There's also plenty of Jeanson missed this, and like, well, actually, I wrote about that 2.5 years ago.
For sure,
missed that, which is just same song, 50th verse of they don't pay attention to what we publish.
Yeah,
they're never taught what we hold to. They don't keep up with what we've.
Well, and unfortunately, I think that's true, not just with unbelievers, but even a lot of mainstream apologists. They're not interacting with actual in-depth research by yourself or Snelling and many others, Dr. Armitage. I talked with him when he was in El Paso. He's finding blood clots, have DIC, evidence of drowning in the dinosaur bones. And a lot of people, they're not going to read the material. And it's fascinating. Now, before I forget to ask, does some of your research interact with the out of Africa hypothesis? Is there anything coming up from that, or as far as the evolutionary model of out of Africa?
I guess you could say indirectly, and perhaps in the future directly.
Yeah.
This model that I'm advancing, that I say makes great sense of science and is working and makes sensible predictions. It meets all these gold standards that evolutionists have been demanding of creationists for years. It reorients the whole tree. Right now, the evolutionists have the tree oriented a certain way where all the African branches are the most ancient, and so here's we came out of Africa, here's the first events and so forth. The way I've oriented where I say, hey, no, you can find Noah at the base of the tree and his 3 boys and the genealogical structure and echo of Genesis 10 down to Shem's generation 6 and Joktan and his sons and Joktan's brother Peleg and the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all that you can see. The fact that this model is working, and I'd say working better than evolution, is to me is indirect refutation out of Africa.
Yeah.
I said in the future it might be direct because among the lines of evidence in support of this are these father-son mutation rate measurements.
Okay.
Simple experiments. You get dad's Y chromosome, you get son's Y chromosome, and you count the number of differences.
Yeah.
Straightforward. Not complicated, at least in theory. Those measurements have been done almost exclusively, or as far as I know, they have been exclusively on men who are not African. Now, why is this relevant? Okay, so you've got the evolutionary tree that's oriented in Africa, and one of the consequences of doing all this is all the branches then end up terminating at the same spot.
Hmm.
The implied prediction of this model, mainstream out of Africa model, is every lineage, every father-son line in this whole tree mutates their DNA at the same rate over time, same number of mutations per generation. The way I've reoriented the tree, which I think is the valid reorientation with no at the base and such, ends up making some of the African branches, some of them, very long. Which implies that there are some branches that mutate faster, some mutate slower. My best guess is there's some genetic factors behind it. Whatever the explanation is, here's a testable prediction. That these branches either had faster mutation rates in the past, and some of the very long ones, the longest ones, may still have high mutation rates to this day. We can go out and test that. Hopefully we will be able to test that. And one of the people who've written in belong to one of these longer branches. So hope we can test it in the near future.
Exciting.
If it turns out that these branches mutate faster, that would be a direct, strong refutation of this out of Africa idea, because out of Africa, the way they've drawn the tree implies constant mutation rates or identical mutation rates in all of these various lineages.
Do they have to be consistent, those?
That if you measure, so they would say if you measure father-son mutation rate in some of these, what I'm calling long branches, should be the same as these non-Africans over here that we've already measured. And I'm saying, no, this will probably be a lot faster, twice as fast, 3 times as fast, 10 times as fast, whatever the length of the branch is compared to these down here. And so if there is a discrepancy between African lineages and non-African ones, this would be a direct confirmation of the predictions that so I put that in this book. And again, it's still future. No one's done this yet that I'm aware of, not in the literature. And if we do indeed find that, this would be the opposite of what the evolutionary community would expect. I don't know if they actually put such a prediction in print, which we have a whole other discussion of. If evolutionists are not putting these types of predictions in print, is it science by their own standards? And I'm putting predictions in print. Creation science is making predictions, and is science by their own standards. So in that sense, if we get to that point and do that experiment, that may be a way to directly test the out of Africa idea and refute it, if that's how things turn out.
That's exciting. And of course, they always want to throw up the, is it peer reviewed, but it has to be by their own accepted standards too. I'm sure you get that kind of comment of, well, is your material peer reviewed by them?
Yes, it's a common question, and ultimately, when it comes from the evolutionary community, a circular argument. So someone says, is your work peer reviewed? I say, yes, it's reviewed by scientists with terminal degrees in the relevant fields. Oh, but it's creationist, isn't it? I said, yes. Well, that's not true peer review. I said, well, who peer reviews your papers? Creationists? No, only fellow evolutionists review evolutionary papers. So, well, our evolutionists are better by what standard? And really, that's where it gets circular, but it gets better than that. Because in this specific case, with the Y chromosome, and I talk about this in the book and in published papers, we have documented evidence of evolutionists literally saying in print, we're fitting facts to conclusions.
Oh, wow.
So 2 of the most relevant papers to the father-son mutation rate that were based on high-quality data. There's a whole other backstory here we can get into. Early studies were based on low-quality data, seemed to fit evolution. Then we had 2 high-quality studies that didn't fit evolution. In one of the studies, they put in the supplemental materials. And I should back up and tell more of the context. This is Carmen et al. Carmen is the first author, last name of the first author. 2015 study. They're looking at 323 men from around the globe. Just to understand the origin and history of humanity. And as a control, to make sure their methods are working, they've got some father-son pairs or brother-brother pairs, men of close genealogical relationship, about 30, 31 of these, as a check on their methods. And they say in the paper, when we measured the DNA differences, the Y chromosome differences among these 30 pairs, 31 pairs, the rate of change was 10 times higher than what we expected.
Wow.
So we created a filter to filter out data. So obviously this must be wrong, was their point. It disagrees with evolution. So they create a filter to filter out data that does not match until they can bring the number down closer to something that matches. They still didn't get it quite as close as they wanted to. But they're literally filtering out data that doesn't match the expectations of evolution. Fortunately, in that paper, they gave you the raw data for, at step 1, here's the mutation rate, but if we filter out this, then this is the mutation rate. So you can go back and say, well, let's just take an objective filter or take the raw data unfiltered by this evolutionary standard. And that's where you get the fast mutation rate that fits creation science.
Wow.
The other paper and this is actually where you'll see some of the published criticisms. Let me give the backstory. This other paper, they're looking at 50, this is a 2017 Nature paper, looking at 50 Danish families.
Oh, okay.
Father, mother, offspring.
Hmm.
And of those families, 17 of the offspring were boys. Whatever the remainder is were daughters, then I guess. So you've got 17 father-son pairs. But the purpose of the paper is explicitly to measure mutation rates, not just the Y chromosome.
Okay.
So they measure with exquisite detail the parent-offspring mutation rate for the 99% of our DNA that we get from both parents. And they talk about the single letter mutation rate and the insertion and deletion, which is sort of the small chunks of DNA that change.
Okay.
The bigger chunks that change. There's just no stone basically left unturned in this very meticulous study of mutation rates. They talk about the Y chromosome. I think they talk about the big chunk mutation rate, the insertion deletion mutation rate, but not a word about the single letter Y chromosome father-son mutation rate. So it's like they cover everything but this.
Yeah.
And so first of all, the silence is conspicuous. Second of all, some of the raw data slips through. In figure 4, I think it was of the paper. It's a tree based on the men of the Y chromosome. And they've got a scale bar, so you can kind of visually extract off then the differences between fathers and sons, or take a guess at the fathers and sons. I just took the 17 most closely connected pairs.
Yeah.
And again, it's a high mutation rate that fits, with creation science. Well, now if you go online, you find these critics. Well, we emailed the authors, and they said you're probably doing it wrong. I laugh.
Wow.
Number one, why didn't they publish it the first time? Secondly, why don't they publish it now?
Yeah.
Thirdly, are they going to let the creationists peer review it?
Yeah, that's
or
a
at
good point.
least publish the data in a transparent way so
Yeah.
we can know if there's some funny business like with this other paper. And fifthly, I can basically already refute it and say it's wrong because the model, so if you take that, what I've inferred from their published data, the stuff we can actually get access to, say, okay, the tree must be this old. That implies then, the testable prediction is you should be able to see the history of population growth in the tree. Already published that 2.5 years ago. And in fact, the paper's titled something about testing the predictions of this Y chromosome clock.
Yeah.
The book is a further test of all this where you can say, can you read off human history? Yes, you can.
Yeah.
So, again, you could have published the data the first time. You could have published it the second time. The guy who emailed them won't even publish the full correspondence. He's like, no, that's private emails. I'm just giving you selective quotes from it.
Huh.
And why not just follow the testable predictions from this? No, there's no discussion of science in this. Of doing experiments. It's they said so, you're wrong. And I just have to chuckle. I'm like, well, if that's the best you got, this is a great way to show the world where the state of affairs are at. The creationists are doing science. The evolutionists are insisting on what so and so said so as the arbiter of a discussion.
Wow.
And that again, that's a great gift because if that's where they want to dig in their heels, great. Now we know where we're at. One side's doing science, one side's not.
Yeah.
And it's them themselves who are saying it and insisting on it.
That's so fascinating. And I think it's important that we challenge them and call them to the carpet, that just point out, hey, look, this is what's going on. And I mean, the show is called Engage Truth for a reason. We want people to engage with the truth of, I believe, the total untruth of the biblical worldview. And, the data confirms that. I believe you may remember his exact name. I remember reading a quote. I think it was from one of ICR's Creation Basics that said, it was talking about the mutation rate. As an evolutionist, he said, why are we not dead several times over? I don't know if you've heard of that quote before.
Yeah, I think it has to do with probably John Sanford's work in the 99% of our DNA, where the evolutionary community is saying this is too fast. We're going to go extinct at some point.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So one of the closing things I want to think about is, well, it really relates to the presuppositions of everyone when you're even teaching the data, and whether you will allow the data to lead you to the conclusion that's logically implied and so forth. So, we're thinking there's a lot of conversation in the country right now about education, about students. And so we have parents attending meetings and so forth. But I remember you talking about this on Doreen Virtue's show, and this topic about, I believe, how were you raised in a Christian school? Is that right? Or homeschooled? Or
I was homeschooled through 8th grade.
Okay.
And this is the 1980s, early 90s in Wisconsin. and my parents were sort of at the ground floor of getting things going at that point in Wisconsin, homeschooling wise, which is part of the reason I went. Part of the reason I went off to a small Christian high school. So homeschool through 8th grade, and then the question was, if I go to high school and we're still early stage homeschool, will universities recognize a homeschool diploma, high school diploma, homeschool high school diploma?
Okay, yeah.
Because again, this is early stages.
Yeah.
Nobody knew the answer.
At that
now
time,
we do.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, it's respectable, acceptable, but that was part of the background too. Well, we probably should at least have part of the time get a diploma from a recognized school. There were 3 Christian school options in the area. Only one was explicitly young earth creation, and that was the one my parents picked, partly I think for that reason. And so I had a strong Christian creationist upbringing. Again, had gone to worldview weekend conferences.
Oh yeah, for sure.
In Wisconsin, and we had lots of creationist books and materials. John Morris, or I found my notes from a Ken Ham lecture.
Yeah.
And all that was, I think, hugely influential and critical to surviving then when I went off to secular university.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I remember you talking about before when there was a certain point where you realized I'm going to have to really think through and test ideas compared to what I have understood and weigh those. Is that right? Maybe that was more in university level.
I'm trying to think back. I guess I think back to my upbringing, and I feel like it was strong enough where once I got to university, and I lived at home for my undergraduate, which I'm thankful for.
Oh, nice. Yeah, blessing.
One summer being an exception, it was enough exposure to say it make me even more grateful.
Yeah.
But part of the summer fellowship, scientific research fellowship on campus.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I can look back and say that the creationist training I had, which involved learning a lot of evolution,
Sure,
made me comfortable enough in class where I feel like there was nothing that surprised me.
Yeah, that's good.
That to me is, I think, a key element, because how many students will go off to class and wait, we never learned about this. What do I do? And it hits you like a ton of bricks, and
Sure.
now you're scrambling, not only trying to learn the material to repeat on the test, but here's an attack on my faith and I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I haven't heard it.
Whereas, I mean, I can tell the professor what the process of evolution is and how it works and what he thinks the evidence is for it, and then why I think it's wrong. So that makes university, I think, much less tense. There are plenty of tense times because I try to raise my hand and diplomatically express objections, which of course they weren't too happy about. But that's a different sort of tension than my own personal inner tension of, I don't know what to do with this, and I've never heard this before, and is this something we have an answer to?
Yeah.
So that background I think was critical, and that's my advice to every student. We have people who come by, and parents or grandparents or students themselves saying, what do I do? What should they do? What should we be doing to train them for college? And my advice is you have to have a very strong. You have to know what you're gonna hear in class before you get there. Because
that's a great point.
Another thing too is expect to redouble. This is actually advice I had heard from somebody else.
Yeah.
Who said, you go to secular college, you're going to hear the secular worldview. So if you really want to hear the biblical side of things, you're going to have to read just as much outside of class, in addition to class, as for part of it, because it's all secularized, regardless of the discipline. This is beyond just science. So that's key. Having a strong, supportive local church is critical.
Sure.
But back to this preparedness idea, I get the sense in today's culture there's just this push to graduate, get on, get through it, get fast, get done, get working. And the whole concept of, well, what about taking a year off just to get apologetics training?
Oh yeah, I'm in favor of that.
Gap year or something.
Yeah.
That's viewed as bad.
I
actually don't think the admissions process at most universities cares.
Really?
I don't think it's viewed as a negative. In fact, once you get to medical school, there's so many people who apply who are cardboard cutouts or cookie cutter from the perspective of med school. They're looking for something unique or different. So some guy, I think, who went to Saudi Arabia, one of my colleagues, got in. He said, I probably got in because I went to Saudi Arabia.
Oh, really?
I don't think it was for apologetic purposes.
Yeah.
But it was something different that set him apart from the other students. So being different in that sense, almost these days seems like it's a plus. So consider taking a year off. And we've got courses now. I was almost trying to reinvent the wheel and found out we already had this sort of program.
Oh,
We
yeah.
have online courses which really can be completed as a high schooler. You think about how to use your summers. We've got
Here at AIG?
Yeah, we've got 6.
Okay.
I think if you go to the answers education section of our website or something, there's currently 6 courses, maybe more now. I might be even adding courses related to these.
Oh, that'd be
books
exciting.
I published.
Yeah.
But this is just, doesn't matter if you're going into science or not. Biblical apologetics. There's Bible and earth sciences, Bible and life science, or Bible and geology, Bible and astronomy, Bible and biology. Maybe I'm probably butchering the titles, but my point is there's 6 of them. So if you do, let's say, 2 every summer, and they're not long courses.
Sure.
You can already get a great foundation before you ever go off to university. You may not need to take a gap year if you use your time wisely as a high schooler.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good point.
And like I said, for me, thanks to my parents, that was built in to the curriculum of homeschool, built into the curriculum as a high schooler because they picked a school that had that as a distinctive, where they said, no, we're committed to this. We're not ambiguous on the age of the earth or origins and evolution and creation and such. So all that played a huge role. And I'd read outside of class too, just because I found it interesting.
Yeah.
And maybe because my dad was a dentist and my mom was a nurse before she had me.
Yeah.
There was already a science atmosphere, perhaps,
Sure.
or at least a medicine atmosphere at home. But that is essential in the sense that I don't know how you can go off to college without having that sort of preparation.
Yeah, I think that's so valuable, just that advice, very practical, because I don't know if you've seen Dr. Lyle's recent articles talking about 90% of students, they grow up in a Christian home, yet go to secular education, end up graduating with an unbiblical worldview. And it's interesting because I think I start thinking about, and I'm not getting into in this video about education choice. That's maybe a conversation at a time. But the what I am getting into is there does need to be a redoubling, like you said, of like you have a preparedness of what's coming, but you also are redoubling on testing those ideas of here's what we learned and comparing it with scripture and also good creation science. And I think some of those stats are showing that a lot of parents aren't doing that, if we're honest. They're not doing that redoubling, just hoping youth group is enough. And that's why I appreciate you saying, like, take that gap year or be in some program, because that's a large reason why we started our ministry. I was a youth minister, and now we're trying to help youth ministries to help fill that gap. Where please teach your kids to go through the scripture and memorize it. They absolutely need to do it. Foundational, abide in the word. But we want to help complement and strengthen the church and strengthen their faith to have that. And I'm not seeing that redoubling in other studies that say 4% have a biblical worldview, which complements that. And I go, what's the point where people are going to go, is enough? So we're not only playing catch up, that we're proactive. And so I appreciate your advice there.
Yeah, and I know some parents are, we're going to send our kids to public school because they can be missionaries there, which, I can see why people might do that. At the same time, even high school and middle school themselves are battlegrounds.
Yeah.
So whatever a grandparent choice is made, anytime you're in a secular public school setting, there's this constant barrage.
Yeah.
And if students aren't prepared for it, at whatever stage it is, that can be lethal to their faith. And preparation is such a huge, I feel like a huge element of all this. I mean, we'd all be damned if it were not for God. And I can say it's my parents, but it's ultimately the Lord's kind providence and grace and mercy. But there's also this great responsibility. God commands parents to train their children.
Yeah,
and
amen.
Here's your discipleship field. So be aware of the attacks that are ongoing that you may not see.
Yeah.
But I can say there's just one example. I remember watching, I think, the movie God's Not Dead. I don't remember which one.
Several now.
Yeah. But I remember relatives saying, that professor, that's such a caricature. I said, no. I said, I've been in college. That's not a caricature. It's aggressively anti-Christian. I was in math class. I was in calculus class. Freshman year, I think, in college. And the professor just out of the blue one day he's a pleasant guy, but out of the blue one day draws a graph on the board and tried to show the massive growth of knowledge with time. Oh, we don't need God, he says, turning around. What are you doing? This is math class.
Yeah.
But I thought he had to get his stab at Christianity there while he had a chance. Wow. So don't underestimate, I guess, the back doors secularists will exploit to try to undermine the faith of their students.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's so vital. Malachi says God desires godly offspring. So it's not merely kids that just know the Lord and are saved. Obviously, we're not saved by faith plus certain views on things, but we want to disciple the mind, and we want to take captive every thought. And we look at that stat I quoted earlier. Well, we have a large number of Christian students graduating with an unbiblical worldview. Well, if the biblical worldview is total truth for all of reality, as Nancy Pearcey unpacks, then an unbiblical worldview is dangerous for society. And we're seeing the fruits for that in our culture right now. So it's self-evident. We want them to be saved. We're saved by faith alone, grace alone, and Christ alone. But there's nothing we add to our salvation. But we want them to be discipled, to obey all that He has commanded, and take captive every thought and every field of knowledge to the Lord Jesus. And that's what you're doing with Trace. And I pray and hope that more people will join and give you that data, and others, maybe research assistants and so forth. And, I believe the Lord's going to bless it. You're doing excellent work, Dr. Jeanson, and I appreciate your time today. It's a joy. This is my first time being here at the Creation Museum. I'll go to the Ark tomorrow. And it's truly a moment of worship going through here. And I'll tell you what, before we close out too, those who are watching, I know sometimes I have evolutionists that come on, they want to comment on the show. Please read his book, engage with the material. And also here at the Creation Museum, they actually have what the evolutionists say and the biblical model, and you guys quote from the source. So I don't think it's straw mans you guys are putting up on the exhibits. I think they're very well done. And it's a blessing being here. So I'm going to go through multiple times and just soak it all in. So again, if you could maybe share a reminder where people can go to put information in for your research.
Yeah, and I'll say it as well, if you're looking to purchase the book, as of right now, making this video, we are sold out of the first printing, but we're taking all sorts of back orders, pre-orders, whatever you want to call it. So you can call into customer service, you can go to our website, you can go to Amazon. They're doing all sorts of pre-orders. I'm surprised. I'm watching the Amazon rankings. I thought, as soon as it's sold out, book sales are going to drop, but they've stayed up there.
That's awesome.
There's an ebook I can say now as well, because I've already downloaded it. There is a audiobook coming, an enhanced audiobook. Again, the book itself is extremely visual. So there'll be the enhanced audiobook is basically, they had a professional author read the text, and you can then have as a companion all these color plates as he references them in illustrations. And if you do want to participate in future research, it's answersingenesis.org/go/trace. So it's the homepage, and then you add on /go/traced, title of the book. You'll find that not just the supplemental materials, but if you scroll down on that page or click on the button that says the Hidden History of Every People Project, it'll take you down to first name, last name, email, and then whatever message you want to put in, go straight to my email, and I'll respond to you that way. So special thanks to anyone who does, because it's been a lot of fun, and I'm really excited about where this goes. It's just the beginning of hopefully a project that I'll get to do the rest of my life.
Yeah, well, praise God. We're grateful for you and the work you do here at Answers in Genesis. And I just want to tell our listeners, please like, subscribe, and share so more people can engage with the truth.